there are only two paths, two destinations, two principles, two choices, two religions, two gods, and ultimately two kinds of people. The Bible calls them the wheat and the tares, the sheep and the goats, the fruitful vine and the withered vine, the pure woman and the harlot, the saved and the lost, the righteous and the wicked. The Bible is describing a war, a conflict, a controversy that is more than just a superhero Jesus fighting against a supervillain, Satan, but a controversy between two principles of operating, two methods of living. But there were not always two. In the beginning, there was only one. One God, one method, one principle, one harmony, oneness. In the beginning, there was one, and this one was God. And the primary definition that the Bible describes of this one God is love. You notice the Bible doesn't say God is goodness even though he's good, or that God is knowledge even though he is all-knowing, or that God is power even though he has all power. No, all these other attributes are characteristics of the core central identity of God. God is love. And the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 13 that love is not self-seeking. Love doesn't seek to promote self. And that's kind of a negative way to say it. If you turn that to a positive, if love doesn't seek self, then love does seek others. And because God is love, we can say God is not self-seeking. God is other-centered, seeking the welfare and good of others. And as God, the Father, Son, and Spirit came together, they began to use their energy to give of themselves to create. In the first being they created, a spectacular being created at the dawn of creation. Isaiah 14:12 says he was called the son of the dawn. His name was Lucifer. And Ezekiel 28 tells us that he was perfect when God created him in all of his ways. And can you imagine, after Lucifer is created, Jesus looking to his Father and saying, "Look, Father, isn't he wonderful?" And the Father looks back to the Son and says, "Yes, he's perfect in all of his ways. He's beautiful, he's gorgeous, and let's make some more beautiful creatures that are free, intelligent, and capable of genuine love." And soon the heavens were filled with the sound of rejoicing, laughter, singing, and happiness, as everything was created to operate upon the principle of other-centered love. In the beginning, there was one pulse of harmony, one principle of action, one method of operating, one religion, one God, one unified creation. But now, there are two. Into this perfect, other-centered flow of outward-moving love, giving, and beneficence, an antagonistic principle entered. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 14:13 that Lucifer became infatuated with himself. He began to look inward. He began to direct his energies. Instead of seeking to uplift and bless others, he began to promote self. "I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly. I. And the Bible says there was war in heaven. Now, when you think about this idea of war in heaven, what kind of a war do you think this was? Do you actually think this was a war over might and power? Do you actually think Lucifer stood up and said, "Hey guys, I actually have more power than God. I challenge him openly to an arm wrestling contest"? This was never about might and power. Do you think this was about real estate? Lucifer walks into the heavenly sanctuary and says, "Wow, man, this building is incredible. Look at the cathedral ceilings and the incredible artwork. Father, you wouldn't mind if I had this building, would you?" What do you think the Father would say? "Well, it's a building. If you want a building, hey, no problem. I can make another one like that. What's a building?" Where did Lucifer want to sit enthroned? In a building? Or in the hearts and minds of God's creatures as the one most loved, trusted, and adored? So how did he accomplish it? 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 tells us about this war. It says, For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not worldly. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Now, notice what we demolish. We demolish every argument and pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God and take captive every thought to Jesus Christ. Now think about this for a moment. If you have a war over arguments, pretensions, knowledge, and thoughts, where is such a war fought? In the mind. And Lucifer, of course, is the father of lies. And where do lies have their power? In the mind. And so Lucifer began to lie, and primarily he lied about God. That's why our weapons demolish everything that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And sadly, Adam and Eve believed those lies. And the war spread to planet Earth. In the beginning, there was one. Now there are two. Loving others or seeking self. Sacrificing self or sacrificing others. Giving or taking. God's way or Satan's way. Life or death. And because of Adam and Eve, every human being born on earth today is born infected with this principle of me first. The world, the scientists call this survival of the fittest. Watching out for number one. See, greater love is no man that he give his life for a friend, the principle of God's kingdom, which means I love you so much. I'll do whatever I have to for your health, for your welfare, for your good, including if it comes down to it, give my life that you might live. At war with Satan's principle of survival of the fittest, which says I love myself so much, I'll do whatever I have to promote and protect myself, including if it comes down to it, kill you that I might live. Give my life that you might live, kill you that I might live. These are the two principles warring it out in our hearts and minds. We all have these antagonistic principles running within. And we need to see how this controversy enters every phase of human experience. How in every act of life we are battling and deciding on which side of this equation we will end up. August 18, 2001, Orlando, Florida. 15-year-old Edna Wilkes and her friend Amanda Valence had just finished their freshman year of high school. And they were so excited they wanted to celebrate. So Friday evening, they planned a swim in Lake Conway. Shortly after entering the water, Edna felt something bump into her arm. She thought it was one of the other kids until she saw an alligator rise in the water next to her. Before she could scream, the alligator grabbed her, pulled her under the water. It started spinning her over and over. She said, I heard my body crack. I think I'm going to die like this. And then, for an instant, the gator loosed its grip. She burst to the surface, screaming for help, but everyone was swimming as fast as they could for shore. Edna screamed, come back, don't leave me, come back, don't leave me. But everyone did leave. Everyone, that is, except her best friend, Amanda. Amanda said, no, I can't leave my friend out there to die. So Amanda grabbed her boogie board and began swimming to where Edna was floating in the water. As she reached Edna, she saw blood floating in the water. And just as she reached, she saw the alligator rise and again in the water a few feet away. Amanda slid off the boogie board, pushed Edna up onto the board, and began swimming to shore as the alligator began swimming towards them. Amanda was telling Edna, it's okay, hang in there, you're going to make it. And they did make it to shore, where Edna was taken to the hospital, and she recovered. What path was Amanda on that day? Which side of the equation did Amanda find herself on that day? What method was she practicing in her life that day? Pensacola, Florida, March 10, 1993. Michael Frederick Griffin, a 31-year-old professed Christian from Pensacola, after praying for the soul of Dr. David Gunn, age 47, stepped out of a crowd of protesters and shot him 3 times in the back, killing him in front of the abortion clinic where he worked. What path was Mr. Griffin taking? Which method and principle was he practicing in his life that day? Samantha Edwards was a rambunctious, fun-loving 9-year-old who didn't think twice when her cousin dared her to climb to the top of a 70-foot tree. No sooner had the dare been laid down than she started scampering up that tree, and within minutes she was at the top of that tree shouting her victory for the neighborhood to hear. Then as she started down, her foot slipped, her sandal got caught, and her playmates said they heard the sound of 1,000 angry bees and beetles and a flash of blue light, and Samantha was screaming and suddenly hanging unconscious upside down. Caught by one foot, Samantha had touched a high power line and been jolted with a 7,200-volt blast. Immediately, her 11-year-old neighbor, Chris Haney, barefoot and wearing only shorts, ran to the tree, climbed nearly 70 feet up in the air, precariously near the high power line, disentangled Samantha. In his arms, he carried her down before the emergency services arrived. What path was Chris taking that day? What methods was he practicing in his life that day? Which side of the equation did he choose to put himself on that day? September 11, 2001, New York City, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. 2,973 people killed as Islamic fundamentalists crashed 2 planes into the train towers, one into the Pentagon and one into a field. What path were these men taking? What method were they practicing? Which side of the equation were they on? February 2001, Norina Bensel, principal of the North Hopewell Winterstown Elementary School in Red Lion, Pennsylvania, just finishing a phone call when she looked up and saw a man entering the school. Thinking it's one of the grandparents, she goes out and asks if she can help the man. And suddenly he pulls out a machete and began to attack her. He swings at her. He hits her arm briefly. She pulls back just as she swings for the abdomen and misses her. He turns to run towards the classes. Norina screams, "Call 911, lockdown." She runs to her office and hits the alarm, alerting the teachers to lock their rooms. But before she does, he enters a kindergarten room of 23 students taught by 53-year-old Linda Collier. The crazed man came in swinging. He cut one child's arm. As another child pulled away, he cut the ponytail hanging from the back of the child's hair. Linda began screaming, "Stop! What do you think you're doing? Stop hitting those children!" And he turned towards Linda and gashed her arm and hand. But the distraction was enough. The children ran out of the room, down to the principal's office, and the man was chasing them in hot pursuit. Norina quickly ushered the children into her office, hid them behind the desk, and as the man came towards the office, she stepped up into the doorway, and he began to rain blow after blow down on Norina, but she held her ground. She would not move. He cut her arm. He cut several fingers off, but Norina would not move. And as he was raining blow after blow down upon her, Linda and the school nurse came and jumped on his back, and he collapsed and surrendered. What path was Norina and Linda taking that day? What methods were they practicing in their life? What principle were they choosing to live by? October 4, 2006, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. 2 days after the deadly shooting of the 10 Amish girls, the Amish community gathered to raise money for the killer's family. The New York Times reports, in what's being called a stunning example of the imitation of Christ, the Amish community, devastated by the cold-blooded murder of 5 of its schoolgirls, is raising money for the killer's family. Amish residents of rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, have started a charity fund to help not only the victims' families, but also the mass murderer's widow and children. And from the Associated Press, Dwight Lefevre, a spokesperson for the Roberts family, said, An Amish neighbor comforted the killer's family and extended forgiveness to them after the shooting. And columnist Rod Dreyer, reacting to the Amish outpouring of support to the killer's family, wrote, "Yesterday on NBC News, I saw an Amish midwife who had helped birth several of the girls murdered by the killer say that they were planning to take food over to the family's house. She said, and I paraphrase closely, 'This is possible if you have Christ in your heart.'" In the beginning, there was one, but now there are 2. two antagonistic motives, and each one of us must decide on which side of the controversy we will be found, which method we prefer, what character we develop. Christ has come to heal us, to restore in us his methods of love. And if you trust him, he will pour out his Spirit and recreate us, recreate you and me to be like him, loving others more than ourselves. And when he does this, when we let him, even though there are two, even though we are torn, even though we are pulled in two different directions, he will purge the infection from our hearts. And then again, there will be only one. And he made known to us the mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in Christ to be put into effect when times have reached their fulfillment, to bring all things in heaven and earth together under one head, even Christ. In the beginning there was one. Now there are two. But in the end there will again be one.